So if we so what? How would you think then a state-owned enterprise? How is that structured?
NGO.
Yes, it must be NGO basis, but it can also be a. What is ESCOM? Section 21 or PTY limited?
Isn't it the limited public company? The public company.
Yeah.
And SAA. And
So if you can buy shares in it, it's a public company.
But the difference is all the shares rest with the government. Remember some time ago they wanted to get private money into ESCOM? Which was a little bit of a foolish thing to attempt. Because, why do I say that? ESCOM at the time, that was quite some time ago, ESCOM sold electricity to industry very cheaply. And the man in the street pays most, and then you have your municipalities and your industries, and we all read about BHP Bulletin. That was just good dealing on BHP Bulletin's side. But the essence is that they wanted industry to invest in what will why would industry invest in something? What do you think? Must be profit. So for industry, for ESCOM shares to be viable, they would have to ask more for the electricity so that there's at least some value growth in the shares. So you actually have to expect, but now what will happen to industry? That means they will also have to charge industry more for electricity. So where I then gain on the one side, I lose on the other side. So you actually shoot yourself in the foot by supporting something like ESCOM, because you'll have to up the income. And that's a bit of a catch-22 situation. Now electricity prices have gone to a level where it might be more viable. I don't think we need the money now anymore, but... So that was a bit of a misjudgment. Okay, then we have sectors in industry. We have the primary sector. That's where we get the raw material from. That's mining, farming, harvesting. Then the secondary sector is where it is processed. It might be the flour mills, for instance. And then we have the tertiary sector. That is where it's distributed. But we could, for instance, have it doesn't mean there only has to be one primary, one secondary, one tertiary sector. It can go through a few chains.
Where would services fit in here?
Services would be primary. It can be, they actually can even interact because you might use secondary products in your primary service.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's just, it's basically in what stage of its life cycle is it? Okay, activity 1, that's the activity which you'll also note in your PMA. So in your groups, just make a few notes. If you look at the businesses that Richard was involved in, Richard Maponya, what sectors? When he planted crop, what was that? Primary sector. Milk?
Secondary.
Or tertiary?
It's tertiary. Because it's distributed, it's not producing.
But why is it not secondary?
But he was manufacturing because he was putting it into his own bottles.
That is secondary activity. Okay, so that is just that one says, you know, as far as
Processing.
the processing of the milk is secondary, it is not milking the cow. He was milking the customers. Okay, so it's not the milking as such, that is primary. But then he bought in bulk, that is secondary. And he distributed, so he had secondary and tertiary.
Secondary.
Okay,
Collected from the central point.
And distributed.
yes. He collected, bulk, processed, distributed. The point where he collected may also have been secondary, not necessarily primary. That's why I said you can go through more than one secondary process.
The clothing, for example, would have also been secondary and tertiary because he was getting the offcuts or the lower grade clothes that they weren't using. And he was obviously sorting, and I mean, he would have had to.
No, I
Or was
think
he just going straight into retail?
that would be more direct tertiary.
Okay. So because he didn't work, but he was working with the product. But I suppose not changing its form.
No, it's not real. That it goes through a changing process.
Yeah,
He sort of got the, say, the write-offs or defects, and he could sell them. So that would be quite straightforward tertiary. But if he repaired them, if there was damage to the clothing, he first repaired them, then there's a secondary activity before it can. So then there's a...
Which only he will know.
Exactly.
What are we supposed
Now
to
you can discuss in groups.
I thought we done.
We've done half of that. Just make a few notes on the businesses that he did. Make sure you got the drift. When you finish, we don't need to discuss it. I think if there is something that you're not sure about, we can discuss it. And then we can...
Does activity go into our PMA?
That one goes into your PMA. All right, are there any questions on primary, secondary, and tertiary? One or two?
So it depends on the site that you're looking at it. You can see it in different levels. So how do you know when to make the choice between primary, secondary, and tertiary? One of our examples was the service.
Yeah, the service.
The horse racing.
Okay.
Would that be primary or secondary or tertiary? Because it's taking money.
Let's look at the horse. There's a horse breeder. Is that primary, tertiary? Secondary. Primary. Then you got the trainer. What is that?
Secondary.
Secondary.
Manufacturing the skill, basically.
Yes.
You have running.
And then we have the race. The jockey.
Yeah.
That's the tertiary function of that horse.
No, but then what is it as a whole?
Because we're just looking at the
Because
business.
if you break down the business, there's obviously going to be a primary piece to
But I
it.
can tell you the horse racing was not a business.
The what?
The horse racing was not a business. There is business in horse racing. But the horse racing itself was more an activist activity. Because remember the colours that he chose for the horse racing, for his jockey colours, ANC colours. So that was more. He said, you know what? Remember, he said he sees all these black people standing here at the horse races and betting money, but there's no black man's horse running, and that's what he wanted to change. But that was now not really for profit. So if you segment it, you will find primary and tertiary, and you'll have to look at the horse racing business. I don't think it can easily be labeled for him as a business. There's a lot of people that only have horses for image because it's good to have horses for the people you know.
But
Make
can we
profit within the
split
horse.
what would it be then, essentially?
From the racetrack point of view,
Yes.
From the breeder's point of view or from the trainer's point
But
of view?
that's what I'm saying is
No,
that you
from
can see
Richard.
it from every. If you look at it, there's so you can in every situation you can break it down into 3 sections.
You see, the purpose of the sectors, the purpose of the sector is to position yourself. Like, that's why I said the breeder breeds horse. That is definitely primary. The breeder buys feed. That is secondary, in its secondary stage of the product. But you need to position yourself and say, right here, I am at this point where I'm breeding horses. I use the example with them, for instance, farmers that supply Woolworths. Those operations are spick and span. They are clean. They run like clockwork. Somebody once told me how many tons of bent cucumbers they throw away. But that you don't see. Because Woolworths want straight cucumbers. But if you look, as you see that operation, you can eat off the floors. Now, if you ever see that operation and you walk into Woolworths and you see that cucumber lying there or that bottle of milk and you've seen how they milk those cows, I tell you, those cows get treated. I wouldn't mind coming back as a cow. But that is what you see in that bottle. So what they say is our primary source must start portraying our image. We must start portraying our image from there. Anybody maybe sees where it comes from. It must look good. So that's why you want to you analyze your business in terms of sectors to see where do you need to position yourself, and how do you want to be seen. Who was it that said? If I now, stop existing, or my business now stops existing, would I recreate it? That's the first question. And if I decide that I would recreate it, what would it look like? And that's really why we want to see how we want to look in our different sectors. How do we position ourselves for our markets? And how do we compete in the sectors? Because sectors compete at different levels. So, yes, you are going, Lindy asked, but how are we going to know that we are right by identifying, no, there's no right and wrong. Because if we go to the horses, you can break that business down. What is primary and what is secondary, what's tertiary.
And also the story doesn't tell us how far he went. He doesn't
No,
start from he bought the horse, he trained the horse. It's just saying he did horse.
He wanted
So
horses.
in this case, if you apply to Richard, which is what the question is, it only applies to tertiary because he made money off it and that was it.
Yeah, when they won.
And probably was involved in the grooming and the maintenance of the horse because you have
That
to,
would have been a secondary function that he paid for.
yeah,
So,
but not primary,
no, breeding is would be primary there.
which he wasn't.
But what is racing?
What is racing? I think it's about 90% image for the owners. Because it's not winning.
Cruel.
I can show you statistics. If you use the in factor, it's safer to play the lotto.
Yeah, but the point is that image still does generate something.
Okay, if you look at, for business, you look at not only image, you look also at social business.
Status.
Who do you connect with? When you are with all these horse owners, must feel like Alibaba and the 40 robbers, but there are certain people that are good to know. So that is for networking purposes. A lot of people do a lot of things in businesses for networking purposes.
So are you saying horse racing is not a business
Horse racing is a serious business.
for profit?
Yes.
What business is it?
Bookmakers make a good lot of money.
Gambling.
What business?
It is a gambling business.
What at what?
They just use horses to get the people to put money down. It's the same as dog races.
So it's
Why do you think they remove dog races?
What is it? Is it tertiary?
Yeah, tertiary.
Yeah, that will be tertiary. That's straight retail because you want the gamblers. It's the same as you go to Sunset. Sun City uses a roulette table, or the casinos. They use blackjack tables and roulette tables because it's very uncomfortable to have a lot of people and horses running around the same room. So it's just a different means.
Yeah.
The means, the horses are secondary to the gambling business. They are the means to get the people to spend their money to phone that jockey and say, if you want to see your wife tonight, you won't win.
Yeah.
That's quite incredible. I believe they say Hong Kong is the most honest horse racing country. They apparently are very, very strict about pulling up horses. But where there is that kind of money, there's always a trick that goes around.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But so you see, we look at three terms. We look at three terms: primary, tertiary, and secondary, and it becomes quite an interesting discussion. Where are we? And that's the point. But that is what we need to do with business: is to really identify where do we stand, so that we know who else is standing here, and how do we need to approach this business.
It was a question that was asked earlier as well. With the filling station and the servicing part, what is it? Is it a tertiary because you're providing the service, or
Yeah, that's tertiary.
Sorry, ma'am.
No, it remains tertiary. If you maintain your vehicle to do deliveries, that would be secondary function. But you are selling your ability to repair the car. That would be tertiary. Okay, then if we look at the environment, we have the internal environment, and that is a business with its own culture. Then we have our immediate external environment. The internal environment consists of our microeconomical. That is the economy within the business. Objectives: why are we in business? Functions: what do we do? And management, processes, etc. Then we look at the immediate external environment, such as consumers, suppliers, labor, and competitors. Can we get people to do what we need done in this business? Do they have the ability? What does society think, our immediate society? What is the image of the business there? How do we want to interact with society? Because that society can most likely be a source of our labor. And that is very much what sustainability reporting looks at, is the triple bottom line: economics, environment, and society. Is that you report not on your profitability, but economically, what is your contribution to the greater economy of the country? Secondly, environmentally, not what you must, but what do you put back into the environment? And society is subdivided into human rights, i.e. the human rights applied to your employees, decent work and labor practices, Social, in other words, that direct environment in which you do business, and product responsibility. So what is your responsibility towards the people that use that which you produce? And what was interesting to find that with the 2008 recession, it was found that companies that seriously partook in sustainability reporting suffered approximately 15% less than their peers that were not involved in sustainability reporting, simply because they were much more aware of their environments. So sustainability reporting gives you a benefit, it's extra work, it's good for the company's image, and it's good for your company intelligence. What is happening around? And I said the same with the Consumer Protection Act when that came out. There was a big scene, but now businesses have to do this as well and that as well. That's not that. I wrote a book on the Consumer Protection Act, and it's actually look at it from a different perspective. What do you think is the different perspective of looking at the Consumer Protection Act?
Gives us freedom.
But from a business point of view.
You have to sharpen your pencil.
You're very close. It is a perfect customer care handbook. So my whole argument went around, if you are not allowed to let your credit notes expire after 90 days any longer, then that's by law. Put it up and say, we offer non-expiring credit notes on returns, or cash as you wish. That's marvelous. What do you tell the customer when you say that? I am confident in my product, isn't that?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're complying to the law. You have to do it. If you advertise it, you can actually look good. And that's the different perspective. Just look at what benefit can I get out of this obstacle. It's quite nice to issue a credit note after 90 days. You say, sorry, that money is mine now. It's expired. And that happened. Because if they just said, we don't want the world of credit notes out there. But now the law was changed because it was totally abused. Now you don't have to put up the notes there and say, sorry, we also abused you, it's over. Advertisers say, you know what, we're good. And that's the way to look at a lot of these things that seem like issues that can actually be turned into benefits to business. Okay, then if you look at the integrated business management quadrant, and this applies to all organizations, is you must get an idea of where you stand in your own organization. The point being, we must know where we stand, but we must not think that we are unique or alone in this organization. Because the idea of the quadrant is to say that we are all interdependent. So we break it down into 4 major areas of the business. What does every business need? Is some form of direction. Not so? I mean, if you can buy a loaf of bread and you sell it to someone and then you sit and wonder, what am I going to do? get up, buy another loaf, sell it again. Then we set targets. Then we buy maybe 2 and we sell 2. Okay? How many loaves do I want to sell? Where's my break-even point now? We're starting to talk some basic business language. So where do we want to, what do we want to achieve? We have certain factors that influence us. We have a recession, we have this, but what are we going to achieve? So that is very strategically based, that's strategy. Strategic activities. This business functions in an environment that is outside of your control. So we have an environmental factor. And what is environment? Is economics, natural environment, politics, law. Sustainability reporting is all about the sector, environment. Pestel analysis is done in that environment. Good one also looks at the microeconomy of the business. But mostly out of your control. If the law is promulgated that the N1 can only be used for bicycles, you have to adjust. They're not going to say the N1 is only used for bicycles, except for Saishalia, she can drive there by car. Those poor cyclists. Okay. So now you have to adjust. What happened to businesses when cell phones came out? What was a question often asked? Not many of you may know. Do you have a landline? Company switchboards were set. You cannot phone a cell phone number. Dial 08 says boop. Okay? What do you hear lately? Don't you have a cell phone number so we can reach you? That is exactly a turnaround of what happened. But that's where the market took it. And similarly, when any legislation is promulgated, that is a new law, you're not going to be the exception to the law. Some politicians are, but that's not the objective of the law. Okay, so that is outside your control. You can't tell them, no, this is really not comfortable for me. You should have heard my wife with the smoking laws. I mean, that's not good for a restaurant. She owns a restaurant. That's not good for a restaurant. Because the smokers are your socializers. Now you've got to commit a crime and allow people to smoke, to socialize. It's terrible. Okay. But they could do nothing about it. Then, to perform the business, we have functions. And the functions are numerous. We have our core operations. We have administration, we have finance, human resources, supply chain, procurement. And they all have processes. And these processes have to be followed to ensure that these functions can interact and produce something. So what we need is a set of functions that assists us in moving towards the direction that has been determined through our strategy. That strategy is based on laws that are in existence. You cannot operate beyond the law, but is also influenced by this greatly. Instead of, for example, economic factors. So there's a big interaction between the two there. That my strategy I can only base on my functional capability. Not so? If I have the capacity to produce 100 barrels of wine a day, and I work 30 days a month, does it make any sense to say that I want my production on this place now, this business must now produce 9,000 barrels of wine a month? In other words, I now want 300 a day, but I don't want to spend more money. Nonsensical, all right? So what can, so I must base my strategic decision on my functional capacity. And then there's one more element, and that is what happens in our control, outside our control, with our strategies, and that is how do we manage that thing which is resisted by all, and that is change. So we have our change driver. And that is typically your project management office. Your innovation incentives. So, if I have to adjust a function to achieve the objective, or as a result of new technology, when IBM took the dreaded 1982 decision to say that they think the global market for PCs is 250,000 units a year. And nobody at IBM said, but what if the market is 3 million a year? And they decided that they are going to go the mainframe route. That was their decision in '82. And they said, you know what? The operating system, there's this guy we know, Billy. He can do the operating system. We don't want to play with these small things. And that garage company with the processor Intel, they can do that. For 250,000 computers, we're not going to waste our time and money on developing things like that. Now we all know what happened to Billy and to Intel. $2 billion institutions, right? But, and then these PCs had to be introduced into the business. And what happened? This was beautiful. Fear, like you cannot believe it. Because everybody, when last have you seen somebody using a typewriter? But you do know the keyboard is exactly the same. So, what was the big thing? There were always benefits. You press a button, you don't use Tipex. You press a button if you make a mistake. You can actually take a paragraph and cut it and paste it. Marvelous. In the old days, they used to stand there with a copying machine and then they cut out the paragraph and then they have print and they stick it. That was copy pasting, really. That's where the terminology comes from. And then you put it through the photo stand and you use that machine, you got a new document. That's how it worked. So, but still, there was a major resistance against the PC. Why?
The unknown.
Fearful of change.
That thing that somebody said, if you press the wrong button, you can wipe it all. That fear worked. So now you have to change this business from a typewriter operation to a computer operation. What is that?
Innovation. Innovation.
Well, that is a result of innovation, yes.
Paradigm shift.
But that is a project. You're not going to teach people forever to do that. You have to get the typewriters out, the computers in. What is a project? Temporary, unique. When the PCs are in, from there on we only appoint people that can work on PCs. But that brings change. And it must be effective, and then it's over. So we need to have a change driver to be geared for whenever we need to change our functions. And for the change driver to be effective in changing a function, it must be versed in all the functions of the business and their processes, so that it knows exactly how it will impact on other functions of the business. And my change processes have to be based on environmental requirements, laws, etc., etc. Which therefore, technological development clearly drives change. And similarly, we cannot have functional processes in place that are contra environmental requirements, contra legal requirements. So these all have to comply with our greater environment. And if we sit and do strategic planning, we plan a strategy. What do we need to implement the strategy? We need an effective project management process. In other words, effective project management drives strategy. So now if we can have our approach to each one of the four quadrants, then we can say, what is this? What is happening here? Is this new technology? It comes from the environment. Do we have to listen to this or not? Or do we maybe see ourselves that in 5 years' time we are going to look like old typewriters if we do not implement this technology now? What is my image with my market, my customers? How good will I look if I still sit with typewriters and not computers? These are all factors. And then that change created new opportunity. In that, do you remember the guy by the name of Ross Perot that stood for American president against George Bush? He's a self-made American billionaire. What did he make his money out of? Fear of change. He worked for IBM. And suddenly IBM said, I think we have to produce a few laptops, or yes, desktops, PCs. And he was a salesman at IBM. And he saw this fear that people had of that one mysterious button. It wipes it all. And what did he do? He said, you know what? I'm going to train your people to use a PC, but to really have this business running effectively computerized, we have to put all your old records on PC. Do you know how they were stored before PCs? Who knows? It's called microfiche, and you don't catch it with bait. It was a film sheet They photographed every document, and that was, and you put it on the screen, and then you sit and say, right, there's a document I want. And the really advanced machines could actually copy that document for you. And that's how these piles and piles of films were stored. But certain documents still had to be original on paper and be stored as well, still today. But how do we capture all of this on PC? Because remember, your people are scared of even touching this PC. But now we must get all your records on it. And he said, I'll do it for you. And he made a fortune. And then he invested his money in oil, which you can't go too wrong with. But, and now there is now, when we talk about the image, I knew a guy in Pretoria that also did it. And this guy was always dressed to the T. If there was a speck on his shirt sleeve, back into the washing. It must be ironed perfectly, not a double seam, nothing. His wife told me he's extremely painful about it. He would hardly sit down to minimize the creases in his clothing. But then we can, when we're in the bush together, it's a total different person. And his reason was actually quite logical. He said, if I look this bit sloppy, how does my client think I'm going to treat his or her data? I am processing all their company information. If I can't even iron a shirt, how can I process that company's information? Sensible. It's the same as Rolls-Royce. There was this guy, Vander something. He drove from South Africa in his Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit right across Africa to the UK. Was not too long ago. And he said then when he arrives in the UK, he's going to pay a visit to the Rolls-Royce factory, and then we'll make an appointment to see them, and then we can all have maybe shake hands because he crossed Africa in a Rolls-Royce. What did Rolls-Royce do? What do you think, Timber?
I suppose they gave him a car.
No. They said they don't want to see him. That was a bit of a surprise. He drove a long way, and they said, well, no, we don't want to see you. Because a Rolls-Royce should be able to do it. So what do? They were rude in a way that they knew it would grab attention, and they gave the reason that their product is so excellent, it really doesn't surprise us. Isn't that excellent? Okay, so, but the importance is, if we know where we are looking at, what we want to achieve, we know where we are. Is it a change driver? Do we need to change? Because we might spot something in the environment that is coming our way. And then while everybody is resisting and wondering whether they should block their switchboards for cell phones, how can we maybe get some advantage? They are busy writing the Consumer Protection Act. What can we do now to say, you know what, that act doesn't bother us because we do it in any case? Isn't that the better reply as to say, well, no, we can't comment now because it's still... Say, it doesn't matter what they write, we want the best for our customers. Just the other, but do something about it then. So we are now going to implement a best for customer drive in the organization. What is that? That's a project that has to go through to the function. And how do we then use that to achieve our strategic objective? Because we cannot tighten our strategic objectives so hard and fast that if there is an opportunity that comes our way, they say, no, 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 leave that alone, we have our strategic direction. We must be flexible enough to adjust it if opportunity allows. Or if disaster forces us. Okay, then if we have legislation which is environmental, we have consumer competition, communication law, employment law, environmental legislation, health and safety, and so it can go on and go on. For some businesses, you also actually have to list and say theft is a crime. If you look at Porter's 5 forces, and PESTEL. What does PESTEL stand for? PESTEL, P is for politics, economics, society,
Socio-cultural.
technology,
Legislation.
environmental, and law. Yeah, legislation.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you look at the diagram, competitive environmental analysis, you will see on the left-hand side, we have the environmental analysis, which is actually PESTEL, without the L. And on the right-hand side, you will see it says competitive forces. So we have environmental analysis and competitive forces. The competitive forces are typically Porter's 5 forces. And Porter said what we have to consider in the business, and Porter's 5 forces will typically fall in our environmental section of the quadrant. What are the barriers to new entry? For example, if you are in the building business and building booms,
Established competitors. Already established. That are there.
but how many people do you get if they got a bucket they call themselves builders? You see them driving around all over the show. So there are a few barriers to new entry. So it's very easy for somebody to say, right, I'm now building. And similarly, compare it to something else. Let's say it now suddenly becomes fashion to do double mastectomies because Angelina Jolie did it. You can't overnight become a gynecologist. What's that? Some people think that when they read,
50 Shades of Grey.
what's the magazine? 50 Shades of Grey, they become gynecologists. That doesn't make you my gynecologist. So, there the barriers of entry are much more difficult. To become a power supplier is by law difficult because of Eskom's monopoly. So those are the barriers to new entry. Substitute. What is my exposure to substitute? Again, not for Eskom. But you really, if you want to buy bread,
Solar power would be a substitute.
solar power can be. There are substitutes for power supply, and there are some good ones. And
Maybe an alternative, not a substitute. Solar power.
yes, well, yes, it's another source of supply. I mean, do you want to eat brown bread or white bread? If you want to eat pork or beef, meat, if you are looking at meat. So if I can, instead of buying, for instance, Mercedes and BMW would be substitutes. Mercedes is a bit more reliable. Who of you drives a BMW? So, I had a 7 Series BMW, and my wife used it. She's dangerous with a motor car. I said, if there's ever somebody that can manage a project, it's her. She bumped that car from a 7 Series right back to a 1 Series. Okay, so a substitute is, do I buy Albany, or what's the other bread? Snowflake bread. Or what? Oh, no, that's flour, isn't it? Okay, but white bread or brown bread? If I want bread, do you put BP or Shell or Total? What petrol do you? What fuel do you use? And that's amazing. You cannot imagine how much fuel companies spend for that market. And apparently Caltex jumped very well ahead because they focused on technology for years. And then Ferrari or Shell said, you know what, let's mix a little bit with Ferrari here. And that put Shell again in the lead. And now Caltex is scrambling to come back up front. And BP really tries, but they're suffering a bit with all the leakages and what have you. But those are typical substitutes. Do you mind what fuel you put in your car?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Why? I honestly would like to know why.
Because of the range, the distance that I get. The one is lighter, the one is heavier, you can get more distance.
Now, who gives you the best distance?
I go to Shell.
You go to Shell.
I use 95 Shell.
And have you tried it against the others?
I've tried, I think, with engine, because I was on it, but it's not beyond that.
Did you take it out of second gear? Who supplies your aircraft fuel?
Aircraft fuel? That I don't know.
BP,
I don't know.
Oh, no, I was just wondering if it might be influenced by that.
No, it's not.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so you do it based on experience.
I'd just like to know, where do you get time to actually measure your range on different fuels? That is amazing.
I push my kilometers to 0. I fill up my tank from the time I fill it up to full tank.
Do the exact same driving on that same tank? Because
Yeah,
it's going to be different
until
long
it's
distance.
finished. Yeah, until it's finished. Then I
No,
get
but do you do the same path
yeah, because I drive around Kempton Park.
only?
You know, from
So
there to the airport.
It's
Not
urban.
airport.
It's urban driving.
Yeah, it's urban drive. So stopping robots and all that. Not much on the freeways. Here and there, very often when I go to picture or so. But most of, I live here because I work to the airport. So my driving's around here. Yeah, so I put my kilometers on 0, fill it up, and then check how far I go.
And what's the difference in range?
I get about 50 kilometers more.
Extra, sure.
That's quite a bit.
It is quite a bit.
Mine works out the same.
Yeah, I get about.
With Shell.
I use Shell now.
I'm Shell.
I think we must get some commission from Shell. Okay, but you see now what is happening here. And that's why I asked, why do you do it? And I also asked, what fills up your aircraft? But the fact is, what did we get now is word of mouth advertising. Now that is exactly what I did when I set out clean Woolies farms are, where their produce is produced. It's word of mouth. I've seen that you've experienced the fuel. And what does Lindy say? I'm Shell now. Yes.
But then again, if you look at it, if you compare the cost to a 95 petrol compared to a 93 petrol, is it worth it to pay that more for a 95 petrol where you can get?
But I'm sure you compared 95 with 95.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
You should have.
95 is yeah. I've compared what you get at Shell and what you get at Engine.
But you also get 93 at Shell.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, there is 93. There is
Yeah, you'll have to compare then apples with apples.
But I'm using 95. I'm comparing here 95 to 95.
Yeah, okay, yes, that's fine, yeah.
Why do you
So
go
it's
for
an engine
95?
also.
But I'm saying the cost
Moment.
of using a 93 petrol wouldn't, which is the petrol itself is cheaper than buying a 95 petrol. Won't that make up where you're paying less for the petrol and you're getting the same consumption? Or maybe the 95 petrol is working out more expensive because of the
Okay, but
price of
that's-
petrol.
I wish we had a society that was looking at things like petrol like that. Some of us are using the next garage.
Your engine.
I usually use the next garage.
I was just saying, isn't engine more based also on the manufacturing credentials we call as well? Whereas what's in them straight from Brent Crude. So through the
You know what is-
His engine is broken.
Why I was so interested when you mentioned it is because a friend of mine is a silk and he was involved in a case years ago in which Sassel was involved. And he said to me, we has to go visit some refineries to check out a few points, and we went to Sassel and they said, no, that tank is Shell. That is Total's tank. Sassel fuel. But they all add their own additives. So they must have something in their additive that must be extremely good. Because the fuel, the base fuel, you won't run a car on base fuel. It won't ignite. The additive makes it combustible. But if you see how those additives, and that was part of the court case, how those additives are mixed into those huge tanks, I'm surprised the car ever actually starts. So it must be something in Shell's additive. It would be interesting if an additive can, because that's 50 kilos to a tank is quite considerable. Okay, but now we have someone that actually did the experiment, and it's the same when I have to go through that terrible moment in my life to buy a car. I just see money flying out the door. But I have a friend who owns a warranty company. And if I see a car for a very good price, I phone him and I ask him, these cars, what claims do you pay on them? And then I get immediately feedback on, do these cars have a tendency to break down because of something? And how serious is that something? And for that poor BMW of mine, he said if you buy a BM older than 6 years, take it straight away, replace the radiator. That's law. You have a problem with the radiator. Because they get the claims from the seized engines. They're just not built for South African heat. But that's what you want to know. BMW won't advertise that. Unless they give you a warranty for a free radiator after 6 years. Okay, so, but in any case, let's go back to substitutes. What can we replace with? Like the fuel. We've just got a convert here to Shell. And what is my buyer power? In other words, to what extent can my buyers, let's take Pick n Pay, who is famous for their procurement. what they often do, they start ordering from a company, and the order goes bigger, and the business grows, and the order goes bigger, and the business grows, and then they start putting the screws on. We want more discount. There wasn't something some time ago where Pick and Pay suffered a considerable loss. And you know what they did? They went to their suppliers and said, we want you to give us enough promotional material to make up this loss. And they did. Because Pick and Pay's order is big. So what is my buyer power? To what extent can my buyers influence my business?
Walmart.
Walmart, yes, for sure. And for instance, Eskom. The public, to what extent can the public dictate Eskom through their buyer power? Not much hope. What do? They switch off your lights. They say, thank you, we've got more power on the grid.
And we don't have competitors.
They don't have competitors. Where do you go? Unless you have a major solar power installation or whatever it may be. So their buyer power, what is their other buyer power? Is industry. Industry has a bit of buyer power. Because what is their buyer power? Now you go to your pestel, and that's why they integrate. In the political side, the industry, like BHP Billiton, says, you know how many people we employ? We don't want to spend that money on electricity. Let the whole country pay a little bit more, and we have more people in jobs. We want to pay so little for electricity. And then they say, yes, that's fine. So there's a lot of buyer power there. And I mean, the negotiations that they had with Anglo-American smelters and the economy. Eskom is paying Anglo-American not to start up their smelters. And this is not confidential information. This you read. Why? Because of that embarrassment. At least just get that smelter. Now you got focused on one smelter that's down, but it pushes so much back into the national grid. But otherwise you cause too much disbalance in business in general. So Anglo is now getting paid to sit still. It's a marvelous retirement plan, eh? So I switched all my house's lights on. I thought maybe they'll tell me, listen, if you switch them off, we will pay you. They don't arrive. Okay. So you have to have the volume to have buyer power. I didn't have it with the house lights. And then supplier power. How do you think a supplier can have a hold on you?
If they're the sole supplier for that industry.
Exactly, that's where patent laws come. I have a patent. You want it. What do these Siemenses, the Hitachi, these turbines, let's look at Hitachi. Supplier power. Serious, because there's a lot of political power. Who has got shares in Hitachi? The ANC. So am I going to fiddle in that market? But what has Siemens done? Will Siemens now say, right, we are at the end of dealing with Eskom? No. How many Siemens equipment runs in Eskom? Plenty. They got the patent. With the patent comes the maintenance contract, comes the money. And that is, and of course the software. And then we build things that can be updated with software alone. And that is very profitable because it takes very little raw material. Plug in something extra, charge a fortune for it because it only works for that. Okay, so, and then we can measure that against the environmental influences, the economical influence, political, social. And that's, yeah, those are the 5-4. So if you look at that diagram, if you want to do a thorough pastel analysis for your PMA, that is approximately what it should look like. Alright, so we also mentioned on the quadrant that we also have some innovation. We need some innovation in today's life. Rather let the innovation come from us than from somewhere else, then it costs. So when Nissan disinvested from South Africa years ago, and Sanlam took over Nissan, the Nissan car factory in Rossland. They can be glad Richard Bapunya didn't know about that at the time. And then the Japanese came back after 94 and said, no, we really want you lot out of here. Because if it was Sanlam, you can imagine how rigid the management was. And the Japanese decided they would like to get some innovation going. And they said, they said to everybody that works at Nissan factory, they said, if you invent something, now I think South Africa, with the politics using the word innovation, we have lost it. We must have innovative talks. And you can put some innovative ideas on the table. Innovative talking must sound very funny. It must be a language that doesn't exist, because you must innovate. I'm talking innovative now. No, really. But innovation is inventing something, putting something new, having a new approach. So they said, if you invent something that increases your productivity here at Nissan, then we're going to do a lot of things for you. Firstly, we're going to tell everybody about this. And we're going to have a party. Every 3 months, we will have a party in which we will give you a certificate. If you introduce an effective innovation that improves your productivity, we're going to invite everybody to a party, give them enough to drink and eat for free, so then you're sure they pitch up, and in front of all those people we will give you a certificate that says, you are an official inventor at Nissan. You invented something that improved the greater function of this operation. And that's not all. In case some of the people that are involved with Nissan in South Africa, in the distribution network, tertiary network, we are, in case they can't come, which they most likely won't, we're going to put this in the Nissan News, our in-house publication, and that goes out to all the Nissan, to the entire Nissan network, because everybody will then know you are invented. There will be a photograph of you. So now you can imagine these visions in the office, the page in the Nissan News, framed, certificate framed. That is recognition. But they said that's not all that we will give you. We will also give you 10% of that improvement in productivity for the first year. So now they talk to the ears that really listen. And what do? They put their money where their mouth is by publishing it in the Nissan News. And they publish the check amount. And that's agreed with that employee. They say, yes, you have increased. So it has to be proven for a year, and they get their check at the function when they get the certificate, when the photographers take their pictures, that moment of glory. And I was invited to one of these functions because I thought it was quite interesting, just to see how these people react. And let me tell you, at that moment, those people don't want to work for any other company than this one. They've got a fresh check burning in their pockets. They've just had quite a few too many beers, but and it was all on the house. This is marvelous. So, and why is that important that you drive innovation like that? It's because if we look at the rate of innovation in organizations, the accepted rate is the square root, what do I do with this? Is the square root of your number of employees. So if I have 4 people working in the company, square root 4 is 2, 50% is innovative. If I have 16 people, square root 4, I'm down to 25%. If I'm 100 people down to 10, I'm at 10%. You see the benefit of small enterprises. 10,000 is 101%. ESCOM has 40,000 people working for them. Small root. So, and why does that happen, do you think?
Governance.
Exactly. It's because we have to do certain things in certain ways. Unfortunately, we have to have certain processes in place according to which our functions are performed. And that takes us back to this relationship where we say we have certain processes, but we need a change driver that understands these processes, which also understands that which happens in the greater environment around us and technological development, etc., so that we can implement that change to improve these functions to assist our strategic direction, whenever we need to. But it has to be a culture in the organization. It's the same as quality. Quality is not something you just build into or inspect into an organization. It doesn't come overnight. Quality is a culture. Years ago, I read an article about a guy. He worked for Rolls-Royce for 25 years. And after 25 years, when he left, they gave him, mounted on wood, one flying lady, the emblem of the Rolls-Royce. And he said, "This is incredible." He says he understands they can't give me a car, and this is the next best thing. I said, "Now, if you were to buy a car, what car would you buy?" He says, "I worked at Rolls-Royce. I won't buy another car because I know what can happen with other cars." But that was that culture of quality at Rolls-Royce. That I hope it's the same in the aircraft engines. And I mean, that's what he said. He can, if he had to buy, he said, they can't give me a Rolls and I can't buy a Rolls, so I will never have a car. But that comes over years. It has to be the very best. To effectively manage projects in an organization is a culture. We follow these processes. This is how things get done. And if we drive change, how do we implement it? If we are innovative, yes, we are open to innovation in this organization. Not innovation on how to stay away from work, how to improve work. But it is an organizational culture. Do you get a lot of scope in the government department for innovation? Usually not. Why not? because there are miles and miles of red tape. To change something is a serious effort. So that's why we have big and small organizations. If big organizations have the benefit, I always compare it to the, who of you saw the movie The Perfect Storm? Where the fishing trawler gets tipped over by the wave, and then we have the Titanic. What happened to the Titanic? The Titanic, in that same movie, in that serious storm, the Titanic would have survived it. You might have had a lot of sick customers on board, but passengers on board, but they would have survived. Whereas in those stormy seas, those huge waves, it was too much for the fishing trawler. Why? Because the knocks were too big. But the Titanic would have been big enough to withstand that knock. But let's go to the Titanic situation. Why did the Titanic go down? It couldn't turn fast enough. It couldn't change direction. Would the fishing trawler have gone down there? No. Would have whipped around nearly. Now that's the benefit of big. Can take the big knocks. But small, if you don't change in time, it can sink the big ship. So we need both. Either way we look at it. Have you ever been to Gold Reef City? Did you go down the mine? Did you see the pouring afterwards? And then afterwards, they got that gold bar that you can, they also say to you, if you can pick it up with these two fingers, you can have it. And so we were there, and I put my two fingers on this gold bar, and I thought, let me see what these guys do. And I tipped it like this, and I grabbed it, and I made it when I made for the door. I think there were about 4 shotguns aimed at me. Okay, it's a joke. Really?
Would you have stopped if they didn't?
No, they were, but their faces, I mean, they really didn't know what to do. Yeah, this, I mean, in public, it's a bit. Any case, so that was nearly outbound. And then we have marketing. So in other words, what is our marketing? Is our communication to our recipients or intended recipients. Now that may either be middlemen such as wholesalers, or it can be retail, tertiary. It might be another secondary process because we, let's say we're talking about a mine, have we gone through a primary process?
Yes.
Yes. And then we go through a tertiary process? We process the gold, we separated the gold from the rock, poured the bar of gold. And if that's the format in which the client wants it, then we leave it like that. But from there, it may also have to be, or maybe melted in smaller bars, and it goes to jewelers, maybe, banks, wherever it needs to go. And then when it gets to jewelers, it again goes to a secondary process to be made into jewelry. And then if that jewelry is a wholesaler, to that jeweler, wholesaling is tertiary, and then it gets to the jewel shop and it is purely tertiary. Because they leave the merchandise as it is. Okay. And then we have service, the customer support process. Now I must tell you this. it may be what you pay, but do you really want to break something that fails, buy something that fails? No. I have this thing, I don't buy anything from Hi-Fi Corporation.
Agreed.
Because in general it goes in for 7 days leave at some stage. Back to Hi-Fi Corporation. So, I have a Mont Blanc pen and I have a parrot. Parrots and Mont Blanc pens don't work together. Parrots break Mont Blanc pens. What happened, this parrot got hold of the pen and it damaged the tip, the nib of the pen. It was lying on my desk and my wife just put the parrot down on the desk and she did something and I was not looking, and the next thing, this parrot had quite a black beak, busy with a fountain pen. Now that is not something you expect to be covered by a warranty. If you don't look after your things and they break, that is your problem. So I took it to a Mont Blanc shop and I said to them, listen, give me a quote to repair this. But I want a quote because I want to decide, do I want to spend it on that money, on that pen, or do I rather put a bit of extra money and buy another one? And they said they'll phone me with a quote. And they phoned me 2 weeks later and said, I can come fetch my pen. Now that makes me quite aggressive. I asked for a quote. Don't decide on my behalf. I will decide. So I'm ready to fight. And off to the Mont Blanc I go. And they say, here's your pen. And I take it out and I write with it. Writes perfect. And I say, now how does, now this is the opening question to our argument. The fight begins now. How much does this cost that I get a knockout? I said no. Mont Blanc's got a lifetime guarantee, of course you know. I had to leave without a fight. And that really impressed me. A friend of mine has a fly fishing rod. I can't remember the make of it. But he also banged, it cost about £1,000 a rod. But he broke the nip of it in the door, his car's door. And he also took it back. They sent him a brand new one. Same story, it's got a lifetime guarantee. Shouldn't break. But if you pay £1,000 for a rod, fly fishing rod, you can buy a lot of other breakable rods for that. Okay, but that is a service, the customer support. What I have my contract phone, and then I always buy, maybe my Dutch blood, but I always buy prepaid time for the cheapest rates in the market, which at the moment is Cell C. And that's my outgoing phone. And I bought from Woolworth, but they gave me a voucher that is Cell C to Cell C. And I walked back to them and I said to them, you sold me this time. You make your money on it and I'm happy with that. But you sold me the wrong time. I found that out after I loaded it on my phone. And since then I have not used that phone. So what I want you to do is take this slip, cancel it off my telephone and change it to the 500 Rand that I wanted. No. I said, I must contact Cell C for this. I said, no. I am entitled to have my situation rectified at the point where I bought it. And that's what I want now. Now this is really difficult. So I said, okay, fine, thank you. And then I kept it. And a few weeks later, because now I can imagine, then when you go to LC, they say, no, but you bought it at Woolworths, they must give, I see this is going to be cat and mouse. So we had a party at home, and I had to go and buy some wine. So I went to Woolworths, and I took, it was 498 Rand and 95 cents worth of wine. And they rang up the trolley. I said to them, here's the money. I prepaid slip. So the manager comes. She said, now this lady at the till is totally asshole. I'm not going to do this to her. She's not going to survive this too well. She said, can I please speak to the manager? Will I please wait till she calls the manager? I said, that's fine. He says to me, well, I can't do that. I said, no, it's not a question if I can do it. I have just done it. He says it doesn't work like that. I said, wait, you don't understand. I bought phone time to use everywhere, not for my CLC friendship club. And I am now irritated by having to use my incoming phone for my outgoing calls. To me, that doesn't work like that. And you have now been sitting with my 500 Rand for about a month. So I have now repossessed my 500 Rand. I said, give me that slip. And give me the Woolworths slip. And I signed on the back of it, and I wrote down my phone number, and I said, in lieu of voucher attached. And I gave it to him. He said to me, but he said, just please your phone number. And then he got it. He said, I'll be in touch with you this week. That was months ago. And I've run a few times into him when he sees me coming, hello. And when I ask for a voucher, then the little ladies look at each other and say, no, I'm not going to sell him a voucher. Okay, so you can enforce good service if you want. But they were not right there. It was what they sold. If their people were not correctly informed, then they have to address that problem. Because what really happened, eventually what I found out, is that the lady that sold it, it was actually, the problem was cell C's. They hadn't informed the people clearly about the difference between the two vouchers. And all you needed to know is if you got a 199 Rand voucher, it was for all calls, and a 200 Rand voucher is just cell C to cell C, but much cheaper. So she thought she gives the cheapest rate, but didn't know about the limitation. But that mustn't be my problem. I've got this thing about doctors. I'll tell you tomorrow. Okay, so if we have a basic business, if you look at a basic business infrastructure, we use technology. Even if it's only the door open, hinges is technology. But we use some form of technology. Without human beings, we aren't going to have a business. The third largest brewery in the world is in Belgium. Munir, how many people do you think would work in the third largest brewery in the world?
50,000.
You wouldn't think 28.
Just 28.
28. Completely automated. It's all, and they all work in shifts. 28 people run it entirely.
Is it SAB owned? Is it SAB owned?
No.
28,000 people.
28 people.
Oh.
28.
It's like Max Steel International is one of my clients, and they've got around about 80 staff. Their turnover is around about the same, if not more, than the whole Dimension Data Group with 80 people.
And that's that's technology.
The revenue with 80 people is 80, yeah.
What's
Max Steel International.
And that is serious equipment because they don't move light product. And then of course, but we need some human resource. And that's where the whole challenge often lies. And then the procurement process. Why are procurement processes so important in a business? Because it's also the back door where the money flies out
Yes.
with ulterior intentions. So we need to have our procurement processes structured in such a way that we have sufficient control over the process, the standard, and the extent to which it impacts on our production line. So it must not be so tight that we hinder production. Have you heard of JIT, just in time? You know what happened to JIT in Japan? It all became late. Why did it happen? The system was good because why did they introduce JIT, just-in-time management?
So that you put all your money in stock.
Exactly, it was an enormous saving that you actually distributed the risk through to your suppliers. They had to be geared to supply you, but they rolled it down again. And you saved money in a few ways. Firstly, capital locked up in stock and cost of premises, because you had to have the storage space to keep everything and appoint people to manage it. So JIT said we must have it in process or in storage as short as possible so that it moves on and turns into money. And then they also worked out, if we can pay in 30 days and move it in 7 days, we actually sit with capital for 3 weeks. And if you got capital in hand, you got money, which you can invest for further return. But just remember to play with suppliers sometimes. But now what happened to JIT? What would a system like that, what would it cause?
Cash flow problem.
Not necessarily, it can, but that wasn't the key problem. Japan's road networks weren't geared for JIT, because what happens with JIT, you have many more vehicles running up and down.
Because you're sourcing more there.
Smaller loads, but many more vehicles just to get it delivered. And then suddenly the roads didn't have the capacity to carry the vehicles, and there were traffic jams, and it wasn't just in time, it was not in time. So when we plan our procurement processes, these are all factors. Can we keep this going? What is the reliability of suppliers? So if we look at supplier power, as we did with Porter's 5 Forces, supplier power may rest in the fact that their delivery is always on time. Now that counts a lot. They may not be the cheapest in the market, but you know that they won't hinder your processes. And then we have the human resources, which either strike, are expensive, and are all unique individuals that need to be understood. And that we need to manage. And so what happens when we pick up problems with these? It's actually quite ironic if you look at business. If you have labor problems, I think a lot of labor problems arise out of the fact that organizations do not utilize the mental power that costs them a fortune. Because if more value was attached to that, I think people would be more comfortable at their work, and I think businesses could run much more effectively. But now, for instance, this strike in the Eastern Cape, this agricultural strike, what happened? The next day, I think there were 2 articles, 1,000 people were fired here and 1,000 people were laid off there. And what did they actually do? They drive the business to the decision where, you know what, this risk is too costly. It may be worth the extra expense to mechanize. And we sit with continuous technological development, so it can happen more and more. Technology gets cleverer and cleverer every time as we progress. So somewhere, because the workforce, the human resources, did not anchor their positions through value, at a certain price they can become disposable. And that's a hard, cold fact. Because we live in a competitive business world, at one point it is not viable to in some instances to even continue business. So the arguments around that are legion, but the fact is we will continue having technological development. The problem with technology, it cannot think. So if we work on our human resources to utilize that thinking power which we cannot get out of a computer, very much like Nissan has done, the Japanese did with Nissan at least, then we get much more value out of that human resource asset that is in the organization. Because it is your biggest expense. And it actually talks back to you. Bless you. This activity is for your PMA. In your groups, make notes about the changing environments in which he had to do business and the influence it had on his business. And one change in his environment that was very, very good was in 1990 when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and drove off in whose BMWs? Richard Maponya. I mean, that advertisement money cannot buy. I think he had global offers for those by selling BMW.
So basically what we're saying is environments can have a negative or positive impact.
Oh yes.
So we can talk about both.
You can talk, and that's important, that even when we talk about risk in business, is risk good or bad? No, risk can be beneficial if you optimize.
Right. So I think the first one that he was involved in was potentially.
Shall we quickly discuss what you found? Sasha and Brendan, we'll see tomorrow. We're starting tomorrow. What time are we starting tomorrow? 8:30? Nobody at 7?
Probably to beat the traffic, yeah.
Okay, let's start with somebody in the middle, group 3. What did you find about the changing environments?
A lot of the whole political environment was constantly changing with apartheid and post-apartheid. And in your example with Mandela and the BMW, changes in the business environment where there was more competition available, so more people doing the same thing. We've got in South Africa companies like Coca-Cola pulling out other opportunities there. When they when the black business owners came together to start the Chamber of Commerce, Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce, that gave them better opportunities to get their voice heard.
Okay, I think stop there. We'll go to another group now, and I think it's so actually with Coca-Cola, the fact the environment that handicapped him actually there played into his hands. He could still use the opportunity, but he was clever enough to do it. I do not think I admire Tokyo Sechwale as a millionaire, but I do admire Richard Maponya. Later on, he benefited from BEE. He deserved it, absolutely. But he could make money. He was a businessman. Okay. Group 2 has become quite small. Are you feeling lonely right now? What can you add? Just add 1 or 2 points to it, and then we'll go through all groups and.
Yeah, I think the changing laws as well, or forced changes in law. In that, as an example, the court challenge by your OR Tambo and Mandela forcing the licensing of the business, albeit the tweaking a bit of that particular venture. I think secondly, it relates to the competition. We saw him in fact moving from one business to another because I suppose of fear of competition.
And I think that's very important because remember we discussed earlier that we said, but he changed quite quickly. But if you had to go to court just to get the permission to do business, how many rights could he exercise otherwise? What hope did he have in taking, for instance, the company that took over his milk market? Let's say he turned to law and said, well, let me put the brakes on this quickly with a bit of a lawsuit. He didn't have much backing. The law was actually against him. So he had to adjust to that environment and function according to that. And there was another guy, I think, Habakkuk Kane. He's got a factory with 300 people working for him now in Venda. They closed him down, confiscated his stock, I think 7 times. And eventually opened his factory in Venda, and there they left him in peace. But that takes a bit of going to go, restart, lose everything and restart 7 times. Okay, at what point can you add? You are running out of points.
These are some of our findings. We noticed that, internally speaking, he failed at some stage to structure his business. That's why he could only succeed where he was doing business.
Where he was present.
Present with his wife. So wherever that there was other outlets for him, so we could see that those business failed. So at some point there was no good management structure.
It's an interesting point to say that, okay, maybe there lacked to be management structure, but at that time in the black community, how much management culture was there? You see, that is, how many people grew up in a management environment that they could learn from their family? So, this is how management works.
Or maybe we can say he didn't really inspire those other outlets.
That might be a point, yes.
Yeah.
And it might also be lack of understanding of that, you should inspire people or motivate them to do something.
But he didn't know better.
He didn't know better. I think it's very much if you look at the Jews through his history, Whenever somebody got upset, they point the finger at the Jews, and then they have to, okay, then we cut a few throats, and then, but they were mostly allowed to trade. Because a few hundred years ago, the tradesmen were seen as rather lowly, but don't dare become a professor or a doctor or something like that. That was not for the Jews, but what were they exposed to is management, trade, and one season. So that was deeply embedded in their culture. And I think that opportunity didn't exist in the black culture at the time because it was just not allowed. And he overcame that barrier, but he lacked a lot of exposure to really apply good business management. Have you got something extra on this group? I don't want everybody to...
He was definitely exposed to the organization in respect of having to do his own finance and HR and potentially a bit of procurement. They don't get into details about how much of that he did. But to start off all these businesses which were self-owned, he would have had to be involved in the functions and in the organizational function.
Yeah, and I think through that, a lot of learning by trial and error.
Exactly.
This doesn't work, now let's try some other way. And every time he opened another business, he had some more experience and he could improve it. But I think there's Stanley, I agree with the point on that area only, Stanley, where he was actually his own institution. Because he could not, he didn't have much to rely on, and he didn't have time to go to Fort Hare and say, well, let me leave my business and go study.
Sure.
So that was quite a bit of exposure for him there. And I think that can bring us to the end of today.